Welcome to Short Takes on Geography with Dr. Lisa Benton Short, Professor of Geography at the George Washington University and Chief Reader of Advanced Placement Human Geography. Join us as Dr. Short interviews Dr. Parag Khanna, geostrategist, world traveler, and best-selling author, discussing central concepts in the AP Human Geography curriculum through the lens of his new book, Move, The Forces Uprooting Us. This discussion series is brought to you by the American Geographical Society, the foremost champion of geography for the benefit of society since 1851. And now, over to Dr. Lisa Benton Short.
So welcome back, everybody. I'm Lisa Benton Short, and I'm joined by Parag Khanna, and we are going to talk today about population migration patterns and processes. And one of the most fundamental parts of human geography is to understand where we are in the world. Where are people located and why are they there? And how is this changing? So Unit 2 really focuses on population and migration, which are two really important processes that get at the heart of where we live and how where we live affects our lives. And so I think it also begs the question that I want to start with. If geography isn't destiny, is demography destiny, Parag?
Oh, Lisa, that's, these questions about the demographics and the distribution of people and migration are really at the heart, at the core. I mean, this is appropriately Unit 2 for sure, of the human geography question. And let's start with the demographics, because this arguably is the most interesting time to be alive when it comes to global demographics, because we're at the tail end of what has been a century of incredible growth in the human population. Around 100 years ago, 1928 roughly, is when the world population began to just shoot up. It had a lot to do with the end of World War I, improvements obviously in nutrition and health, modernization and development, the spread of industrial technologies and so forth. And suddenly the world population went from 2 billion people in 1928 to the roughly 8 billion people that it is today. But why is this moment so interesting? Well, we're reaching an inflection point. We have gotten accustomed to the world population growing and growing. And if you remember, Lisa, back in the 1990s, demographic forecasters actually predicted that the world population could reach 15 billion people. And back then we were talking about a Malthusian crisis of overpopulation, of resource stress, of inadequate food supply, and so on. But actually, the inflection point began to bend or curve in the 1960s and into the 1970s. So again, we had yet more human development, empowerment of women, and many other factors that started to reduce fertility. So what happened was that it's kind of like, the driver of the car began to push on the brakes and the car began to slow down, and it's about to reach that stop. And so the kids of, taking AP Human Geography today, all of you are living through this moment that no one alive could possibly remember, which is that the world population is not increasing at a significant rate with every generation, but instead it will reach a peak. I call it peak humanity. And there's literally no other time that people have been alive and been able to accurately know the population of the world and at the same time be able to say we're reaching the peak. So all of you watching this are actually going to live to see that day. There will be that day, and it will probably be in the 2030s when the front page of your newspapers are actually going to say, this is it. This is the maximum number of human beings alive in the world. And that's just a fascinating moment. Now, there's, again, good and bad reasons for that, of course, and we'll get into that. But now the question is, what comes next? Is the decline going to be just a gradual tapering because of a healthy reduction of fertility, because of the modernization of societies and the empowerment of women and many other factors? Or could it be a rapid decline because of issues like climate change and other severe disruptions that are causing significant loss of life, like more pandemics, for example? We don't know. We don't know if the population is going to steadily taper, bring us back down to a manageable number. And what is that manageable number? Our dear friend Chris Tucker, the chairman of the American Geographical Society, believes that 3 billion people, which was the population right towards the period around World War II, is before climate change began to really kick in, before global industrialization really started to accelerate greenhouse gas emissions, the world's food supply and the planetary boundaries of capacity of the Earth's resources was able to manage that. So where are we going with our actual total population number is a big question in human geography. Now, I'll just emphasize one other point about that plateau that we have reached, because the students of AP Human Geography today are basically the young Gen Z. And here's something very special about all of you who are members of Generation Z. You are probably the largest generation that the human species will ever produce, because it looks like Generation Alpha, this what you see, the top line on the right, the baseline scenario, may wind up being that dashed line that comes in just below Gen Z. So in other words, Generation Alpha, your younger brother or sister, if you have one, or the babies being born around the world today, we'll know by the middle of this decade, roughly, how many Gen Alpha kids there are. And my forecast is that it's going to be smaller than Gen Z. So that's, again, something very, very special. And what it means, and this is the punchline that I have on the bottom here, you are literally, you youth, the young people of the world today, the millennials, the Gen Z, the Gen Alpha, right? The people under the age of 40, you're not only the present, meaning the largest proportion of the world population is young people, you're also the future, because there is not a larger generation coming after you. So what's so special, and it almost sounds like a sci-fi movie, doesn't it, Lisa? Today's youth are the present and also the future. So this demographic question alone is reason enough for AP Human Geography to be such a central subject in understanding our collective future. What do you think of that?
Oh, wow, it really is interesting because, for so many years, as I've taught my own introduction to human geography at GW, most of what we talk about is the pressure that growing population has put on the planet's resources. So to kind of see some of these demographic trends beginning to shift, it is important in two ways. One, just for the fact that you're kind of making a really important point about kind of this peak humanity, and this could be the largest, and we will not reach that 15 billion or 12 billion or even 11 billion, but we might stabilize or even see some decline from a population of 9.5. It also is really interesting because it just reminds us how long it takes to really begin to influence demography, right? That the international community has been hard at work trying to reduce fertility in many world regions, and it has taken decades to start to see that impact of declining fertility. So one of the things I'm wondering, Parag, is what do you think about Thomas Malthus? Is he still relevant today?
It's a great question. And I suppose, we're not going to definitively answer it because there are all of these other variables that impact whether or not indeed we will have sufficient ecological resources and food supply to sustain the population. Technology, for example, we can technically produce enough food for the large world population that we have today, but can we do so in a sustainable fashion? And technology and environmental stewardship and conservation will play an important role in that. The role of trade networks and the geography of food production and the location of people will have a big impact on how we answer that question as well. So I think that the jury is out, but I know that, the present world population based on present trends, I'm sure you agree, has been overstressing, those planetary boundaries, even if we use technology to stretch those boundaries. So like you said, it takes decades, though. It has taken decades for some of the positive interventions in demographics to kick in and to have an effect. So based upon what you've seen and studied, is there an ideal population policy? Because now we see that some of the things that we did in China and India and elsewhere around the one-child policy and so forth have led to the opposite extreme. Almost the predicted rapid collapse of countries' populations and a very high dependency ratios with not enough young people to care for more and more old people because longevity has increased at the same time. So it is so tricky. Is there any particular country, but of course, since no country is an island in a demographic sense, what could we do now to ensure that it is a stable world population and not an extreme scenario?
Well, that's a really great puzzle, because again, we have to think in terms of scale, right? Like some of what you're talking about and then the data you're showing is on the global scale. But if we look at particular countries, there are still countries whose fertility rates are higher than other countries, where population pressures and a youth cohort are still quite large. And then there are countries like Japan, or like where you live in Singapore, where their countries are trying to increase fertility and family sizes. So let me turn that back to you and say, where in the world do you think we'll see pronatalist policies versus antinatalist policies in the future?
Well, we are definitely seeing in the countries of the Northern Hemisphere, the rich countries, the mature economies, the OECD countries, those are the ones with low fertility rates. And many of them, though mostly the smaller countries in terms of population, have been trying very hard to maintain a higher fertility, replacement fertility, trying to keep it above two children per female. But most have not succeeded, right? Russia has not succeeded. Japan has not succeeded. Korea has not succeeded. There have been brief periods where in Sweden or Germany or France, where they managed to get the number up. But overall, because of things like the 2008 financial crisis and COVID, we've generally seen that those policies have not succeeded over a sort of continuous time frame. And therefore, looking at this slide, I can imagine that, given, as you say, there's still many countries in the world with high fertility, and even if they didn't, they definitely have large youth populations. And where you see the large youth populations, of course, it's Latin America, it's Africa, it's South Asia, and Southeast Asia. So can we correct these demographic imbalances and shift the patterns of migration so that there are enough young people to care for the old people in aging societies? And those young people are needed to care for the elderly, to modernize infrastructure, just to maintain it, to pay taxes and be the workers and so forth. So right now we live in a world where most migration is actually concentrated within regions, right? And the largest stock of migrants in the world is actually just the people among the 15 former the republics of the former Soviet Union. And then you have the migration flows within the Western Hemisphere, within Africa, within Southeast Asia, across the from South Asian countries to the Gulf countries, within Europe and so forth. But I can imagine some pretty significant changes lying ahead because of just this age imbalance, this demographic imbalance between old and young in the world. And that is, again, one of the big open questions about human geography is what comes next in these large sweeping flows of people, not just within continents or regions, but across them. And especially given the pandemic lockdown, where we've had this great reset and billions of people are back home. But imagine when borders do reopen and people can move again, and the economic and the demographic landscape and the imbalances are as acute as ever before. I ask myself what comes next. And again, it's such an exciting time to be studying this, to be armed with the tools of human geography, because you can start to understand and analyze and prescribe what should happen next. So that to me is a big question. I'll add one thing though. What you don't see here is that the majority of the world's young people are in Asia. And if I had to sum up if I could choose only two words to describe the future of humanity in some ways, it would actually be Asian youth, because there's 2 billion young Asians right now that are living in Asia. So where they go, whether they stay in Asia or move to Europe or move to America, is going to have a significant impact on the future demographics and economics of those regions.
Yeah, it's so interesting. We are in kind of the last century, certainly, and into this millennium of humanity on the move, right? We are seeing, people leave their countries of origin and move elsewhere. And it's interesting to think that that might actually be a solution to some of the countries that don't have the population growth that they need to over the next 20 to 30 years, for exactly what you were talking about, looking after young people, looking after their after older people, and in a sense being the labor supply for countries in the global north like the United States. But let me just show you an image, because I want to get your take on this. If the future might entail quite a lot of movement of people, and if countries in the global north might need a lot of those people to migrate out of Asia or Africa or Latin America and into the global north, what do you see as the major destination points? Will the United States be that land that welcomes everybody? Because that's not what we've been seeing in our political discourse most recently. And I wonder what are you seeing out there in terms of this immigration and how it's become a part of how countries think about their future?
It's a great question. Well, I mean, right now, as you're saying, in the politics of Europe and the United States and elsewhere, there's a lot of suspicion and concern about being overwhelmed, some would say, by migrants, irrespective of the geography of origin, where they're coming from. But I do think at the same time that the economics point in the opposite direction, which is that, of course, a healthy, vibrant society and economy needs to have that correct balance of demographics. It needs young people. So my view is that the 21st century will shape up to be an all-out war for young talent. Countries competing to have young people come to them. Now, it will also, though, be quite different from the 20th century. There's no question that the 20th century's greatest winner from migration flows and talent flows was the United States. There was barely a second place in the 20th century when you think about just what value global immigration gave and delivered to America in the 20th century. But because in the 21st century, it's going to be a competition among European countries, the US, Canada, and even emerging market hubs and centers that are modern and thriving, the US will have to do more to capture the best and the brightest and from the talent pool. What I see happening is that European countries are changing even the language in which they teach in universities to English so that they can attract the young students from around the world, and they don't think that they're immediately going to go to the US. And even though Canada is a great ally, and we have the longest, most peaceful border in the world between the US and Canada, let's remember that Canada is actually competing with America for talent. And in the last few years, we have seen Canada begin to really pull, well above its own weight in the global competition for talent. In fact, they have a goal in Canada of bringing in 300 to 400,000 new migrants every single year, which, Lisa, is pretty much the same figure as the US has been bringing in the last few years. But of course, as everyone knows, Canada has 1/10 the population of the United States. So Canada is going to be a demographic superpower in the 21st century, precisely because they are one of the first movers in this global war for young talent.
Which, I think taking away something really important from just this brief conversation is just thinking about demography and population distribution, migration, is not just a demographic connection. It also connects to economics, right? A lot of migrants are moving for job opportunities to improve the quality of their life. And it relies a lot on political factors such as immigration policy and strategies that welcome immigrants as opposed to deflecting them away. So, like many things in AP Human Geography, units connect with other units, and that's something that we'll see in some of our future conversations. And I just want to thank everybody for joining us in our introduction to just thinking about population and migration and peak humanity.
Thank you for joining us for this segment of Short Takes on Geography with Dr. Lisa Benton Short. Tune in for this and more great geography teaching resources at americangeo.org. Until next time.